Valerie Warner thought her father, Jack, was her greatest protector until her mother's death revealed a darkness that turned her life into a living nightmare. Now, she's ready to break her silence and share a story of resilience, survival, and the fight for freedom. This is Valerie's journey. Valerie Warner's early life seemed like a page out of a heartwarming family novel. Growing up in a small suburban town, her days were filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of security that came from having two loving parents. Her father, Jack Warner, a passionate high school biology teacher, was her hero, a man with an infectious love for nature and an endless supply of quirky facts about the world. Her mother, Maria, was the glue of their family, known for her nurturing spirit and comforting presence. But all of this changed when Valerie was just 12 years old. On an ordinary autumn evening, the Warner family's world was turned upside down. Maria died suddenly in a car accident, leaving a void that nothing could fill. For Jack and Valerie, the grief was suffocating. But they leaned on each other in those early days, clinging to shared memories of Maria. Jack, once a pillar of strength, struggled to cope. His spark dimmed, and Valerie watched her hero crumble under the weight of his loss. At first, Valerie found solace in her father's attempts to keep their lives together. He cooked her favorite meals, read her bedtime stories, and reminded her every day how much her mother loved her. But over time, cracks began to show. Jack's grief, once a shared experience, started to take on a darker, more isolating tone. The father Valerie had once adored was slipping away, and she had no idea how to bring him back. The loss of Maria didn't just change the dynamic in the Warner household, it shattered it. In the months following her mother's death, Valerie began noticing subtle but troubling changes in Jack's behavior. He grew more withdrawn and moody, oscillating between moments of quiet tenderness and bursts of anger that left her on edge. At first, Valerie chalked it up to grief. After all, wasn't it normal for people to act out of character when they were mourning? But the unsettling moments began to add up. A lingering touch on her shoulder, a comment that felt too personal, small things that, on their own, might have seemed harmless. But together, they painted a picture that Valerie couldn't ignore. One evening, as they sat on the couch flipping through a photo album, Jack's hand brushed against hers and lingered just a moment too long. The warmth that Valerie once associated with her father now felt suffocating, even predatory. Confusion swirled in her mind. Was she imagining it? Was it just her own grief playing tricks on her? But the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. As Jack's behavior continued to shift, Valerie found herself retreating into silence. How could she confront the man who had once been her protector? How could she explain the unease she felt without sounding ungrateful or cruel? Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, and Valerie was left grappling with a terrifying question: was the man she trusted most in the world no longer safe? Valerie's teenage years should have been filled with the usual concerns of adolescence: friends, school dances, and dreams of the future. Instead, she was caught in an unrelenting storm of confusion and fear. Every interaction with her father felt like walking a tightrope. On some days, Jack seemed like his old self, cracking jokes about the oddities of biology or making her favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings. On other days, his gaze lingered a moment too long, or his words carried an unsettling undertone that Valerie couldn't shake. She began questioning everything, including her own instincts. Was she overreacting? Misinterpreting grief as something darker? The lines between reality and her own fears blurred, leaving her paralyzed. Valerie longed to talk to someone, but shame held her back. After all, how could she tell anyone about the unsettling feelings she had toward her father, the man who had always been her protector? To cope, Valerie threw herself into her studies and spent as much time as possible outside the house. School became her refuge, a place where she could breathe without the weight of her father's presence. But even there, the shadows of home loomed large. She avoided sleepovers and made excuses to her friends, too afraid of what might happen if they ever saw what she lived with daily. One evening, after a particularly awkward exchange, Valerie locked herself in her room and stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face. Why does this feel so wrong? She whispered to herself. In that moment, she realized her life was no longer her own. It was dominated by fear, guilt, and the unbearable weight of pretending everything was okay. When Ella Moss entered their lives, it was like a ray of light breaking through a stormy sky. Jack had met La at a local grief support group, and the two quickly formed a bond. She was vivacious, full of life, and seemed genuinely interested in helping Jack and Valerie rebuild their fractured family. For the first time in years, Valerie felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Ella's presence would give her father the support he needed to finally heal. At first, Ella was everything Valerie had hoped for. She cooked meals, brought laughter back into their home, and treated Valerie with a kindness that felt almost maternal. For a brief moment, Valerie thought she might finally have a chance to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But as time went on, Ella's seemingly perfect facade began to crack. Ella's attentiveness toward Valerie started to feel suffocating. She pried into Valerie's private life, asking invasive questions and subtly undermining her attempts to assert independence. Worse still, she seemed to encourage Jack's increasingly erratic behavior. Instead of providing balance, Ella became an accomplice, enabling Jack in ways that left Valerie feeling more trapped than ever. One evening, Valerie overheard a conversation between Jack and Ella that made her blood run cold. Their laughter felt conspiratorial, their words laced with a tension that she couldn't ignore. It was then that she realized Ella wasn't there to help, she was there to control. Any hope Valerie had placed in Ella evaporated, leaving her more isolated than ever. As Jack's behavior escalated, Valerie's life became a waking nightmare. What had once been subtle, almost deniable moments of discomfort turned into overt actions that left no room for doubt. Jack's advances were no longer masked by grief or affection, they were deliberate, calculated, and terrifying. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, Jack cornered Valerie in the kitchen. His words were soft but invasive, his tone one of unsettling familiarity. Valerie froze, her heart pounding in her chest, as she searched for an escape. The man standing before her was no longer her father, he was a predator, and she was his prey. Valerie's attempts to set boundaries only seemed to provoke him further. Jack would apologize, promising to change, only to revert to his behavior days later. The cycle left Valerie emotionally drained and questioning her own sanity. She began keeping a journal, documenting every incident in a desperate attempt to validate her experiences. But even with written proof, she felt powerless to stop him. The breaking point came one night when Jack tried to enter her room uninvited. Valerie bolted the door, her hands shaking as she held her weight against it. "Leave me alone," she screamed, her voice breaking with years of suppressed fear and anger. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening, and for the first time, Valerie felt the full weight of her father's darkness pressing down on her. The night Jack tried to enter Valerie's room marked the beginning of a shift within her. For years, she had endured his manipulative behavior in silence, convinced that maintaining the illusion of a family was more important than her own well-being. But that night, as she sat trembling against the locked door, something inside her snapped. She realized that silence was no longer an option. If she didn't stand up for herself, no one else would. The next morning, Valerie sat across from her father at the breakfast table, her hands clenched into fists beneath the surface. Jack, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within her, sipped his coffee as if nothing had happened. For the first time, Valerie saw him not as the grieving father or the protector of her childhood, but as the source of her fear and pain. "I need to talk to you," Valerie said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Jack looked up, his expression curious but wary. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had. "This has to stop. You can't keep treating me this way." Jack's face twisted in a mixture of denial and anger. "What are you talking about? I've done nothing but take care of you since your mother died." "No," Valerie interrupted, her voice firmer now. "You've taken advantage of me. You've crossed boundaries, and I won't let it continue." The confrontation was raw and emotional. Jack alternated between deflecting blame, making excuses, and offering empty promises to change. But Valerie refused to back down. She laid everything bare, forcing him to confront the damage he had caused. While Jack's words were laced with regret, Valerie knew better than to believe them. His patterns were too ingrained, his apologies too hollow. That day, Valerie decided she couldn't stay under his roof any longer. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she had to find a way out. Valerie's escape came in the form of Samara Gillespie, a vibrant and empathetic young woman she met during her first semester at university. Samara was everything Valerie needed at that moment: kind, understanding, and utterly unafraid to speak her mind. From their first conversation, Valerie felt a connection that she hadn't experienced in years. Samara's presence was like a breath of fresh air. She had a way of making Valerie feel seen and heard, without judgment or pity. Slowly, Valerie began to open up about the horrors she had endured. Though the words were painful to say aloud, each confession felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. For the first time, Valerie felt hope, a glimmer of a life where she wasn't defined by her father's actions. One evening, after a particularly intense conversation, Samara took Valerie's hands and said, "You don't have to go through this alone. You deserve to feel safe and loved." Her words were a catalyst. With Samara's encouragement, Valerie mustered the courage to report her father's actions to a university counselor, who connected her with resources to help her begin the healing process. But the journey wasn't easy. Leaving her father's house was one of the most terrifying things Valerie had ever done. The night she packed her bags, she felt a mix of fear, guilt, and liberation. As she stepped out the door for the last time, she knew she was closing one chapter of her life and opening another one that held the promise of healing and freedom. Leaving her father's home was not the end of Valerie's struggles. In many ways, it marked the beginning of a new set of challenges. The freedom she had longed for came with a price: waves of guilt, self-doubt, and the haunting memories of what she had endured. For weeks after moving out, Valerie would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing as she expected to hear her father's voice or footsteps outside her door. At university, Valerie threw herself into her studies, trying to drown out the echoes of her past. But the trauma lingered. Everyday tasks, like walking through crowded hallways or engaging in casual conversations, felt like monumental feats. She often found herself questioning her worth and whether she had made the right choice in leaving. What if her father truly changed this time? What if she had overreacted? Samara remained a pillar of support, encouraging Valerie to seek therapy. Initially hesitant, Valerie eventually agreed, realizing that healing required more than just physical distance from her father. In therapy, she began unpacking years of pain and manipulation. She learned to name her experiences for what they were: abuse, and to let go of the shame she had carried for so long. Slowly but surely, Valerie started reclaiming her identity. She joined a campus writing group, using poetry as a way to process her emotions. Through these creative outlets, she found her voice, a voice that had been silenced for far too long. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Valerie began to see glimpses of the strong, independent person she was becoming. As Valerie gained confidence, she felt an undeniable pull to share her story. It wasn't an easy decision. The thought of exposing her past made her feel vulnerable. But deep down, Valerie knew that her experiences could serve a greater purpose. She wanted others who might be enduring similar pain to know they weren't alone and that there was a way out. With Samara's encouragement, Valerie began writing a blog about her journey. Her first post was raw and honest, recounting the night she decided to leave her father's home. Within days, she received messages from readers thanking her for her courage. Some shared their own stories of abuse, while others expressed admiration for her bravery. The blog became a therapeutic outlet for Valerie. Through her writing, she connected with a community of survivors who understood her pain and offered her unwavering support. Each story she read and each comment she received reinforced her belief in the power of speaking out. Valerie also started volunteering at a local crisis center, where she met women and children facing challenges similar to hers. By listening to their stories and offering them comfort, she found a new sense of purpose. Her past no longer defined her, it became a tool for empowerment and advocacy. Valerie's journey toward healing culminated in a moment she hadn't expected, a day when she no longer felt defined by her trauma. It didn't happen all at once, but gradually, as she continued to rebuild her life and relationships, the weight of her past began to lift. She reconnected with her love for biology, enrolling in advanced courses and dreaming of one day becoming a researcher. Valerie's passion for learning reignited a spark within her, reminding her that there was so much more to life than the pain she had endured. Through therapy, writing, and volunteering, Valerie cultivated a resilience she never knew she had. She learned to set boundaries, trust her instincts, and prioritize her own well-being. Her relationship with Samara deepened, and she built a new circle of friends who celebrated her strength and supported her growth. In her final blog post of the year, Valerie wrote, "Trauma doesn't have to define you. It's a part of your story, but it's not the whole story. There is life after pain, and there is hope, even when it feels like the darkest night. If I can find my way forward, so can you." As Valerie's story reached more people, she realized how far she had come from a scared, confused girl trapped in an unbearable situation to a confident woman forging her own path. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Thank you for watching. If Valerie's story inspired you or resonated with your experiences, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Together, we can create a community of support and empowerment. See you next time.